everybody, it's Emily at Arc Schooling, and welcome back to another episode of Homeschool Tidbits. Welcome back to Build Your Library's Homeschool Tidbits, Episode 5. Today we're talking about narration, or the art of telling back. In this weekly video series, I will delve briefly into a topic related to homeschooling, and I'll share some of my knowledge with you as a homeschooling mother of 4, 3 of whom have graduated. Last month, I introduced you to Charlotte Mason and her philosophy of home education, and we talked extensively about living books. This week, I would like to start talking about something you can do with those living books. And so we're going to be discussing narration. So what is narration? Quite simply put, it is telling back what you've read or heard. Telling back is innate. It is part of human nature to want to tell about things that we've seen, heard, read, experienced. Think about your instinct after you've watched a great movie or read a great book to go tell somebody about it. That's narration. Maybe you summarized your thoughts into a blog article, or maybe you wrote a Twitter thread about something that you were passionate about sharing. That is narrating. Narrating is an art, like poetry making or painting, because it is there in every child's mind, waiting to be discovered. So if it's a natural thing to do, and we just instinctively feel this urge to do it, why do we need to do narration in our homeschool? Because practice makes perfect. Narration is a learned skill. It sharpens your child's listening and observation skills. They have to give their full attention to be able to properly narrate. Narration takes the place of quizzes and comprehension questions, and it can be used with any subject, even math. What a great tool we have at our disposal. The key to narrating is to give your child great books from which to narrate. Since this requires their full attention, they need to have material worth narrating. It needs to be well written. It needs to be stimulating to their imagination. We've discussed living books at great length, so you now know what a living book is and how to choose them. And I will link all the previous discussion we've had about living books in one of these places, so you can peruse those if you haven't seen them yet. As knowledge is not assimilated until it is reproduced, children should tell back after a single reading or hearing. A single reading is insisted on because children have naturally a great power of attention, but this force is dissipated by the rereading of passages. Charlotte Mason didn't begin formal narration until past the age of 6. So when your child is ready, you'll want to start with something small. Don't give them an entire chapter of a longer chapter book to narrate. Instead, give them fairy tales or Aesop tales with which to use for narration. These simple stories are easy to narrate because they tend to be short and they are easily retold. Read a short passage or a short story, then ask your child to tell back what they heard. And that's it. You want them to tell it in their own words. Narration is not memorizing. It is taking in information and making it your own. These simple oral retellings are the paving blocks to composition. Your child is learning to structure their thoughts. They are putting ideas that they've read or heard into their own words. They're deciding what is the most important and choosing which details to include. Those are really important skills to learning to write. Now, be careful that you do not interrupt your child while they're narrating. Don't correct or guide them. It is so difficult when they begin to stumble. It's so easy for us to want to give them information or guide them into continuing into the line of thinking that you think they should be on. But refrain. Let them take a minute and gather their thoughts, if it's necessary, and be sure you are giving them your full attention as they are working through this process. Something that I have found helpful, especially if you're reading something that might have some challenging names to remember, is to put a few notes on the whiteboard before you start reading. For example, if you are narrating a history passage, you might include on the whiteboard the names of the key historical figures that you're reading about. You might include the names of places in which things are happening. These can be helpful when your child is struggling to remember names of people and places. That way, now they're not wasting their time trying to keep track of those names. They can use that time now instead to process the ideas that they heard. As your child becomes a more proficient writer, you should begin encouraging written narrations. These will be brief at first, just as their oral narrations were brief at the beginning, but they will eventually evolve into essays. A child who has been orally narrating all along will find no difficulty transitioning to writing essays and literary analysis in their high school years. There are so many ways to narrate. It doesn't always have to be a simple tell back what you heard. Creative narration helps to keep things interesting. We all need a little spice to keep our homeschool from going stale. So get creative and think outside the box. Maybe your child is more artistically inclined. They can draw some of their narrations. Ask them to tell back what happened in a story from a different character's perspective. Many times, secondary characters will have a unique view of what the main characters do or aren't doing, and they don't always get the chance to express that in the story, so give your child the opportunity to take on their persona and give their point of view. Maybe they could put on a puppet show or act out a skit of the story. Let them quiz you. This is a favorite of my kids, is to see if mom knows the answers. And that gives them the opportunity to come up with really interesting questions based on what they were listening to or reading in the story. Maybe they're creative with filmmaking and they want to film a trailer for a book. Or they could create a board game based on a story or history topic you're reading. There are so many ways to come at narration. It never has to be boring. And the best part is there's no repetitive, boring comprehension questions, no quizzes, no worksheets, and no dull lessons. Narrating means that your child is taking information and making it their own. That is real learning. Anyone can memorize a name and date in order to pass a test, but they're going to forget that information the minute they've taken the test. But listening with full attention, processing that information, and putting it into your own words, that knowledge is for keeps. He must generalize, classify, infer, judge, visualize, discriminate, labor in one way or another with that capable mind of his until the substance of his book is assimilated or rejected according as he shall determine. For the discrimination rests with him and not with his teacher. I hope you found this crash course in narration helpful and useful in your homeschooling. Next week, we're going to take a pause on our Charlotte Mason discussion for a moment, just so we can insert another homeschooling tidbit topic that I think will be very helpful. And that will be to screen or not to screen technology in homeschooling. Until next time, happy reading. Bye.